Imagine a young couple in a doctor's surgery with their 4-year-old child, and they've just heard the news that their child will become incurably blind by his mid to late teens. They are devastated, and they're concerned at what life limitations their child will now face. That child was me. Fast forward, and I'm now 18 years old. I remember waking up, and I couldn't see. I was walking around, crashing into tables, chairs, and doors. I could no longer see the faces of my mum, my dad, my brothers and sisters. The first thing I remember about that day was that I couldn't see the poster of the pop star that I'm too embarrassed to tell you about at the end of my bed. Oops, I thought they had taken that out. But it was so frightening realizing that this was it, that I was now blind. But I didn't want to be blind. I was just hoping that I could wake up and be my normal self. But the reality was that my life was going to change forever. But I had aspirations to do things. How do you drive and do all the normal things that young people do? How would I study mathematics? How could you realize your career aspirations of being an accountant? And how could you travel the world and go sightseeing when you no longer could see? I now had limitations placed on my life. But I suppose we all have limits in our life. So, who's placing limits on you? You want to progress with your job or your career, but you stay where you are? You're in a relationship that doesn't feel right, but you tolerate it because it's easier than being on your own. Or you want to see more of the world and do interesting things, but something's holding you back. In my case, I was at a crossroads. I could take the left path that led to darkness and depression and feeling sorry for myself. And I must admit, I did spend a bit of time there. Or I could take the right path, which led to potential opportunities. And actually, not having much of a choice helps you to see clearly. But as I started taking my first few steps, I found things difficult, but I just kept going. So with a bit of innovation, I started to use cassettes to record my lecture notes and textbooks when I studied mathematics. But actually, looking at you guys, you look far too young to know what a cassette is. I don't know how much of a compliment that is, eh? When was the last time a blind guy told you looked young? Following graduation, I received multiple rejections when I was applying for a job as an accountant. And I just didn't understand what was going on. All my sighted friends were landing great jobs, but then one accountancy firm told me the truth. They just didn't believe that a blind person could be an accountant. And this came as a massive shock at the time. So I took this novel approach, and at my very next interview, I asked the interview panel if I could do a short presentation in which I'd explain to them a little bit about my blindness, about how, as a blind person, I would actually do the job. And I tried this approach at 3 job interviews, and I received 3 job offers. And at the beginning, I found office life a bit of a struggle. Sometimes I'd be so enthusiastic and come in and say, "Good morning," to my boss, only to be ignored. And then I realized that once again, I said hi to an empty chair. Anyway, 7 years later, and I headed up their finance division. And although I was hugely satisfied with my job, I realized that something was missing, and it was travel. Now, every time I tried to explore our beautiful world, I faced rejection. Travel companies just couldn't believe that I would be able to and that I'd want to travel as an independent person. So I realized that in this world, if you want something that doesn't exist, you've got two choices. Either you do without, which, to be honest, I wasn't prepared to do, or you build it yourself. So I jumped off the safe corporate cruise ship of employment onto the risky dinghy of entrepreneurship. And I set up the world's first international tour operator that takes groups of blind and fully sighted people on holiday. Oh, and we bring them back too. 100 countries and more than 500,000 miles later, I would like to invite you all to join me on some of the experiences that I've had over the last few years. So if I may ask you all to close your eyes, only for the next few minutes. Imagine you're jumping out of a plane and you feel the wind and the elements bombarding your entire sensory system from every side. And then the parachute opens and it becomes so peaceful. And you feel free as a bird miles above the ground. Now, you hear the buzz of 40,000 bees as you stick your head in a beehive in Turkey and you're transported to their busy lives. Cooking in a traditional Tuscan farmhouse, you taste the basil and the tomatoes simply from the aromas in the air. Nighttime now, and the Nicaraguan jungle has come alive. You hear the most incredible orchestra of sounds. Noises in 3D. Nature's own surround sound. Okay, you can all open your eyes. But not only to this, but to life. Imagine if I had accepted the limitations that my blindness and other people's limitations had placed on me regarding my travel and my career aspirations. Imagine if I hadn't pursued my passions. I wouldn't have achieved any of the things that I've told you about today. It's become clear to me that most of us, we don't follow our aspirations because we think that we can't, or we're discouraged by other people. So, what are you doing about your aspirations? And more importantly, what are you doing about your perceived limitations? You know, the limitations that are stopping you from achieving your aspirations. When it comes to accepting limitations, I must admit, I've become very stubborn. But it's not always been easy. It's taken a lot of determination at times to get to where I wanted to go in life. But I've had a lot of support from my family and my friends. So, at 18, when I was told that maths wasn't a subject for blind people, I decided to go for it and get my degree. When the finance world told me that I couldn't be an accountant, I decided to prove them wrong. When I found out that I couldn't travel as a solo blind person, I decided to create a way. And after realizing throughout my life that people had so many preconceptions, I decided to reach out and create TV programs. The important words in all of this are, I decided. The decisions had to be mine. And the decisions must be yours too. Unlike me, you don't have to lose your sight to see what life's about. We all have our own obstacles to overcome, our own mountains to climb. But don't let that stop you from living the life that you want. Create a mindset that allows you to be limitless. And I know that that might sound a bit daunting, just like it did to me when I first lost my sight all those years ago. But as you start taking your first few steps, you'll realize that things may be difficult, but by no means impossible. And as you reach the summit of your chosen mountain, you'll see the incredible views all around you. And you'll realize that we live in such a beautiful world. And look, when a blind guy tells you the world's beautiful, you better believe it. Thank you.